Attention please. This upload is only for educational purpose. No intention to infringe copyrights. Learning English with subtitles. GPITRAL. GPITRAL. Definitely a must-see. Follow us.
I was 16 in 1972. That's when I first met the Wests, when I was hitchhiking home from seeing my boyfriend. And they pulled up and gave me a lift, and we got chatting in the car. They seemed a really nice couple, you know, like quite funny and cheerful. So I arranged for them to meet my parents, and within a week I'd moved in with them.
Caroline Roberts worked for a few weeks at Cromwell Street as a nanny, but she left after the Wests encouraged her to be promiscuous and asked her to join their sex circle.
When I think of how everything was like put in place for me to become more promiscuous, I realise now that that was probably grooming, you know, giving me my freedom, encouraging me to sleep with people. I think they were like just trying to make it normal for me to sleep with whoever.
Some weeks later, she was hitchhiking again when they abducted her and took her back to Cromwell Street.
I was undressed, I was tied back up, gagged with cotton wool, and some kind of cotton material was tied around my mouth to keep the cotton wool in my mouth. And that was the start of sexual assault, really. But it was mainly Rose was doing the sexual assault, but it was with encouragement from Fred, and it was almost like Fred wasn't supposed to touch me unless she did.
When Rose left the room, it was Fred's turn.
While she was gone, that's when Fred raped me. It was literally over in a couple of minutes. It's almost as if he just had to have he just wanted a little piece of me himself type of thing. You know, like he after he'd raped me, he apologised and he started crying, which I found absolutely weird. He started crying and said he was sorry and asked me not to tell Rose that he'd done it.
Caroline's mother forced her to go to the police, but she says the way she was treated by one detective traumatised her so much she refused to give evidence in court.
He was a big man. I felt quite intimidated by him, and his attitude was different to the police officers I'd been dealing with the day before. His attitude was very much like, oh, well, you slept with so-and-so, you know, you slept with the lodger, you slept with your ex-boyfriend, you slept with your boyfriend. You like sex, don't you? Bet you were up for it. Did it get a bit rough for you? And I thought, you know what, I can't do this.
The Wests were found guilty of indecent assault and simply given a fine.
In terms of justice, it seems to me certainly they should have been prosecuted and tried for rape. Now, what they subsequently did may or may not be as a consequence of that, but I think the fact that they were arrested for a crime when the victim was allowed to speak may have motivated them to make sure that the victims weren't able to speak after subsequent assaults.
If the police officer that had cross-examined me in such a way that made me feel ashamed of myself, if he hadn't done that, and I'd been encouraged and supported more by everybody, I would have gone to court, and maybe nobody else would have died after my attack.
It doesn't surprise me, it saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me that Caroline Owens felt that the treatment she had from the police at that time was less than satisfactory, indeed perhaps very difficult.
Fred and Rose must have realised they were lucky to have avoided prison. Their next victim could not be allowed to escape. 3 months later, after they walked free from court, they murdered one of their lodgers, Linda Goff. And over the next 6 years, they tortured and murdered 7 more young girls. The Wests preyed on single women waiting at bus stops. Fred offered them lifts, sometimes a room to lodge in.
Part of his MO was to pick up girls at bus stops, to offer them a lift, often with Rose, and that was why they trusted Fred and Rose, because they were a couple, and the women thought, well, man with a woman, that's safer than a man on his own.
In those days, it wasn't unusual for young girls to travel alone, even to hitchhike around the country.
There was probably a lot more trust there, because no one was recognising that there were a lot of dangerous, predatory people out there who were going to exploit and abuse, certainly young women on their own.
Catherine Halliday was a neighbour of the Wests when Fred invited her round to meet Rose. The relationship quickly turned violent.
Through the relationship with them, it was quite, I'm going to use the word abusive, because their sex to people was abusive. There's no other word to use, but it was a form of abuse.
In an interview in 1995, she gave a chilling insight into what the victims had gone through.
It was a torture chamber, there was no other word for it. There were whips and there was all sorts of things in that room. But these suits are the things that I still see. And I wake up literally in a cold sweat because I think I've got one of these masks on. And these masks, some of them had no sort of way that you could breathe in them. Some of them had zips across the mouth, some of them had little holes here, some of them had eye holes, some of them had nothing. And those are the ones that I have the nightmares about, because I can well imagine wearing one of those and you wouldn't be able to breathe.
Catherine was one of the few who survived to be able to bear witness in court.
They were asking me to wear these clothes, they were asking me to go into that room with the whips, and I would just refused constantly. I refused to move in, and I think they got fed up. The fact that I wouldn't play their games with them anymore. So the visits got less and less, and eventually they wouldn't even look at me in the street. So it was just a natural progression, but it came from me. Had I not said no, then obviously it would have continued. And ended up in the garden, I think.
Many of the girls the Wests targeted had been in care, including the local Jordan's Brook care home, from where Alison Chambers had absconded. But why did no one report them missing?
Once girls, girls who'd been in care, left the care home, even if they said, right, I'm 16, I'm off, no one seems to have been that bothered about finding out where they went.
After the trial, it emerged that every public body in Gloucester had lengthy records on the Wests, from school and hospital files to Frederick West's criminal records.
Fred and Rose were pretty cunning because they took children to different hospitals and so on. So there was some, they tried to avoid that. But the fact remains is that there were gaps in information exchange.
Over 2 decades, no one sounded the alarm, even though the West children received treatment for everything from minor injuries to an ectopic pregnancy, venereal disease and horrific vaginal injuries.
Somebody had done something to that girl which I didn't know enough about to understand what that child was trying to tell me. I tried to say, like, what's the matter with you? Unfortunately, either Rose was there or Fred was there, and they would stop her from sort of telling me. And she did actually say to me that she wasn't really allowed to speak of this.
The Wests were finally stopped when social services were alerted to the abuse of their younger children, and a persistent detective started to ask questions about what had happened to 16-year-old Heather West.
When it all came out in 1994, when Fred was arrested for the murder of Heather, when all the facts came out about the case and all the girls that were murdered and when they were murdered, I really suffered badly with survivor's guilt.